Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about F1 legends. Welcome back, and we're onto the final decades of this retrospective series, the 2000s through 2024. For many of you, this is when you might have started watching Formula One. The names on this list likely evoke emotions and memories. And if anything, like us, you're interested to see how the sports transition that began during these years continues into the future. Many on the grid today look to the legends we discuss as inspirations for their own racing ambitions. Before we get to our conversation, though, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, Dick, this is, well, I guess it's technically our final recording in this F1 Legends session, but I find that we're going to do this a little bit differently than all our other episodes, right? Because our other episodes, we did it in decades, but I think you wisely decided to outline this in a different way. And I figured it'd be better for you to share it with your audience why it's going the direction that it is instead of taking it decade by decade.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about, the great F1 drivers from the year 2000 right up to 2024, and the reason that we're doing it, the cynic or the jaded one in me would say it's because, we need to talk about these drivers, who actually had careers that spanned multiple decades. The longevity of drivers these days is very, very different than the longevity of racing drivers back in the 60s, 70s, whatever, even the 80s. And that is that a couple things. Number one, the safety in the cars has increased, which means one of two things. Either drivers were not getting killed off as fast as they used to be, which is a good thing. But the other part is that a lot of drivers felt like that they needed to retire before they got killed. So they would retire after, a limited number of seasons, simply because it was sort of like, you know what, as the longer the moth flies near the lantern, the better the odds are that the moth is gonna get its wings burned, right? It's just that kinda playing those odds, and so to get out of the sport alive, a lot of drivers retired at a very young age, which then opened the door for new drivers to come in and take their seats. We're not seeing that as much anymore, and so we actually are gonna be talking about several drivers whose careers have actually spanned 3 decades. In other words, they raced at some point in the 2000s, the 2010s, and now the 2020s, and so I think it's gonna be very interesting. The drivers are able to do this because, like we talked about, the safety's a whole lot better, but also the drivers know how to take care of themselves better. They understand, the importance of fitness and nutrition and having a sports psychologist, keeping their brain fit and all those kinds of things. And so we're seeing drivers last a whole lot longer. They're better prepared when they get into the sport, and then they're able to stay in the sport a whole lot longer, assuming that they're quick and race winners.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, you know this, that I have read the book that Aki Hinsa, one of the very influential sports doctors that helped in the world of Formula One, and his book is called Exponential, and the other one is called The Core. And he talks about all these profound insights that he gained that he was able to give to some of the people that actually we're going to talk about. And I do agree that the ability of the racers to take the time to develop themselves and their health has contributed quite a bit to this longevity. So I'm excited to explore who these legends are and what they've learned. So who's our first one? I think you have on the list is Michael Schumacher. Is that correct?
That is correct, Michael Schumacher. So here's a guy who, obviously, like Senna, in many ways redefined the sport in his own way. And, he made his F1 debut in 1991, and he raced all the way into the early 2010s, even with taking what was originally a retirement after the 2006 season, but it really became more like a sabbatical. So, um, Schumacher really redefined the sport in a couple of ways in my mind. One was around fitness. Um, Michael was very much, the guy that brought fitness to the forefront, in terms of the importance for an F1 driver. And so, um, he, um, he actually redefined in many respects what a Formula One driver ought to look like. Before, aerobically fit and skinny was good, but now he was aerobically fit and he was strong as well. And so you had to get strong because as time went on, the cars began to pull more and more G loadings and all that, which required more upper body strength, more core strength, and all those kinds of things. So really kind of redefined it there. He also was very much known for his technical prowess. And as the cars became more and more complex, the drivers had to become more of an engineering mind than they already were. So, really, really interesting story. And of course, like many Formula One champions, even though it's a rich, auto racing is a rich man's game, so many world champions came from actually fairly humble beginnings, and Schumacher is no exception to that. Um, you know, he he was born near Cologne, Germany, and his father actually was a bricklayer who, as a side hustle, ran their local kart track, and Mrs. Schumacher operated the concession stand basically at that track. So both were working there as a side hustle, really to generate extra money for the family. And because they ran a kart track, Michael was exposed to karts at a very early age, and he won his first karting championship when he was 6. So, he started early, and not only did he start early, he started winning early, and by the time he was 18, Michael was the European and German karting champion, and by 1990, he had won the German F3 championship. So his move from cars to karts, um, I'm sorry, from karts to cars was actually pretty darn quick because the following year, Mercedes picked him up because they said, rising talent, German, we want him to drive our sports cars. But that actually didn't last very long because Eddie Jordan, who's, next to Bernie Ecclestone, was probably one of the great motorsport entrepreneurs out there, had an F1 team at the time. And in 1991, Schumacher made his F1 debut at the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa of all places, do it at Spa. That's a pretty daunting track for any rookie to jump into an F1 car. And he did it and he qualified 7th. So, he set the world, not on fire, but he certainly sent a message to everybody. And so he was then signed by Flavio Briatore for the Benetton team, and he drove for them in '92, and he won his first Grand Prix at Belgium that year in '92. He went on to win 2 world championships in '94 and '95. In those 2 world championships, he won 18 races. Um, those championships were notable though because he had collisions with people like Damon Hill and, the rivals, his rivals of the day. Um, and and there were questions not only around his driving style, but also around just the legality of the car that he drove, and quite frankly, given the history of Flavio Briatore, I think there was certainly some question marks there. Um, in '96, right after winning his 2nd world championship, he made his move to Ferrari, and at the time, Ferrari was in a bad way. They hadn't won a world championship since 1979 with Jody Scheckter, and so it was very similar to kind of what we saw. There was just, Ferrari was there and but not a whole lot of discipline, and chaos kinda reigned, and, the Italian press was putting all sorts of pressure on them, and they really didn't do so well. But he came in, won 3 races with Ferrari in '96 and then 5 in '97. Um, his championship um, wound up being stripped from him in the final race of the year because tried to run his championship rival, Jacques Villeneuve, off the road. And so the championship was stripped from him um, because of his driving. And um, and so about this time, a new rivalry formed between Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen. Hakkinen was driving for McLaren, and Hakkinen won back-to-back world championships in '98 and '99. But then in 2000, it actually came together for Ferrari and Schumacher, and he won 5 world championships in a row. Um, he finished his career with 91 victories, 7 world championships. And so he'll go down in history not only as a guy that kind of redefined the sport, but he was just a supreme natural talent, um, and certainly an incredibly intelligent driver that allowed him to make the split second decisions that needed to be made. He was very adaptable, which I think that all the great drivers were adaptable either to a car that maybe wasn't to his liking, but could figure it out what to do with it. He was very mechanically aware, and um, and so um, that coupled with his technical feedback and technical understanding, he was almost an engineer in the car, um, really made him incredibly formidable. And so, um, anyway, after the 2006 season, he retired. Um, but then he came back a few years later to help Mercedes come off the ground, kind of as a repayment, I think, more than anything else, for being selected to the Mercedes junior team, 20 years earlier. And he did get on pole once or twice, certainly podium, but he never won a race with them. And then, of course, very sadly, shortly after he retired, he had a skiing accident in France that caused a severe head injury. And to this day, we really don't know what sort of condition that Mike was in. So had a had an absolutely brilliant career. Had what should have been an amazing and enjoyable retirement. Really cut short by that skiing accident.
So I have a couple of questions and maybe even a point. I wonder, have you watched the Schumacher film documentary that's
Yeah,
on Netflix? I think
Netflix.
it yeah.
Yeah,
Do you feel like that does a pretty good job for people who might wanna go and learn more about Michael?
absolutely. Yeah, Michael's wife Corinna had a lot to do with that,
Mhm,
and so I think that it was probably pretty accurate.
mhm, mhm.
A
The
lot of great, home movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought that part too was nice to see what you said about, like, the karting aspect and
Mhm.
the family insights that it gave. I
Yep.
do think it's interesting of how you note his physical goals that changed what we now see, especially because aren't you the one that noted in some of our episodes, like Nigel Mansell, his physical aesthetic is very different than Michael's. And
Yeah.
and this is during the time where we're seeing the cars become heavier, right?
Yeah.
Trent, right? So it makes sense that Michael would have been wise to have started to adapt to that. And I wondered also, you brought up Mika, and I think it was John that had sent us maybe sometime last year a video of an interview that Mika did in Monaco. And I found that so insightful. I know that you had to choose very carefully because we could have had a lot more names on here. But is Mika one that would have been on this list, but for time? He seems to have had a really good rivalry with Michael.
Yeah, he did, and, of course, after he won his 2nd world championship, he retired,
Mhm.
and honestly, at the time, there were whispers that he had just had enough of having to deal with Schumacher,
Mm.
that he'd just been worn out by him. And I don't know if that's true or if that's fair or what, but those were the rumors anyway. But there's no doubt that Hakkinen was quite the driver.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I forgot what your rubric was for you had to cut off, number of championships. And it's like, I mean, you even brought up Damon Hill. There's so many different people that
Right.
you could have chosen to put on this list, but you had to pare it down so it was manageable for us on this.
Well, and too, we're talking about drivers from that raced from the 2000s to to present day, and Mika had retired by the time 2000,
That's
kind
true.
of returned to 2000. So
That's true. That's true. Okay, so then on to the next one, Sebastian Vettel, another
yep.
German.
Yeah, another great German F1 champion, of course, and again, he grew up in humble circumstances, and he used karting to start his career, and so, he won his first karting championship when he was 7 years old, just like, his hero, um, Michael Schumacher, and he was presented that trophy by Schumacher, um, and so, Schumacher always took an interest in Vettel, really, really interesting about that, Red Bull picked him up at a very early age, and that's what allowed him to continue racing because, again, he did not come from a family with money that could afford to do that. And so he graduated as single seaters and he won a series that at the time even was over here in the States called Formula BMW. And so he won the German Formula BMW championship. And then at the age of 17, he won 18 out of 20 races. So, I mean, the guy was unbelievable. And so at the age of 18, he went straight to go test a Williams F1 car, showed his potential. And by the age of 19, he was made a test driver at Sauber for crying out loud, which was at the time powered by BMW. And so his very first race was at the US Grand Prix at Indianapolis. And like his hero, he qualified 7th for his very first Formula One race, just as Schumacher did, and he finished 8th, and he became the youngest driver at that stage to score a world championship point. And so Red Bull moved him to Toro Rosso, and he wound up finishing 4th in China later that year. Um, in His first win came in just an absolutely rain-soaked race at Monza, driving for, Toro Rosso, and I always have thought it very interesting that, Schumacher won his first I meant Schumacher, Vettel won his first race driving for Toro Rosso in very unusual circumstances at Monza, just as Pierre Gasly did when he won his first race at Monza in very unique circumstances, driving for Toro Rosso. So kind of interesting the common threads that you find through the grid as the years go by. Um, in 2009, Vettel was promoted to the Red Bull team, won 4 races and finished 2nd in the World Championship to Jenson Button. And then in 2010, um, Red Bull produced an unbelievable car, and Vettel drove really, really well, and that began a run of 4 consecutive world championships. And so, we had a period of time where Schumacher in the early 2000s won 5 in a row. And then we had a break where there were singleton championships that were won. And then beginning again in 2010, another German rolls off 4 consecutive world championships. And so he finished his run of world championships at the age of 26, which is just crazy, which is truly remarkable. I mean, when you think about Fangio was 45 years old when he won his 4th championship, which was also just extraordinary, right? So we had one guy extraordinarily young and the other one extraordinarily old. Um, so that was just very interesting. But Vettel left Red Bull for Ferrari in 2015. I think he'd become a bit dispirited because he didn't win a race in 2014. Um, Red Bull was using the Renault engine, which was kind of suspect, and at the time in terms of power. And he thought, well, if I can go to Ferrari, maybe I can emulate my hero and turn them around because certainly Ferrari needed help. And and so in 2015, he won 3 races for Ferrari. Um, and considering that Mercedes had the very best engine and a very on-form Lewis Hamilton, and Nico Rosberg for that matter. Um, so that those 3 wins were very, very impressive. I mean, he did not have the best car. But then again, in 2016, he didn't win a race, and you could see him just becoming kinda dispirited and kinda angry, um, because he was really starting to make some mistakes because he was trying so hard. Um, but They all turned it around in 2017. He won 5 more races, but it was a weird year. This was the year where he punted Lewis Hamilton under the safety car, and then he crashed at the start of the Singapore Grand Prix after starting on pole. And it was just becoming to becoming more and more apparent that the sport was really wearing on him, and he was just becoming mentally exhausted from it after all these years. So eventually things soured with Ferrari. And when I think the nail in the coffin is that after a season with Sauber, which was really at that time was sort of the Ferrari junior team, Charles Leclerc came on board, and he was clearly the quicker of the two drivers. And so Ferrari chose not to renew Sebastian's contract at the end of the 2020 season. Um, and so um, Vettel then moved on to Aston Martin. Um, but, the fire just wasn't there. And after a couple of years, he retired. I mean, he was by this time a dad and very much interested um, in his wife and kids. And so, you know, if you came in and started following the sport in 2020, then you'd never really know just how great Vettel was. But the guy started 300 Grand Prix. He won 53 of them, right? So his win record was, what is that, about 17, 18% of every race that he entered, he won. And he won 4 world championships. And so, anyway, I think he was a very well liked and very well respected member of the paddock. Um, but when he retired, you got the feeling he just retired. And so, um, but there's no doubt about it. When he was at his peak, he was a very accomplished and formidable champion.
Yeah, I think that you're very wise to point out the fact that if our listeners, any of them came in 2020, you're not seeing peak Vettel, and that it's worth going in reviewing. And if anything, in the with this new Formula One channel that broadcasts almost continuously all the races from yesteryear, it's
Hmm.
fascinating to like turn it on and watch some of these races and see Vettel and others of different eras that are coming and just doing the race. And you get to see their skill. You get to see the different types of cars, the different ways that even the F1, like as a media, how they are showing the races to us. I love to kind of just sit there and relax and watch those things as I'm maybe
Yeah.
doing something else. And I think it's so fascinating. What I would say is like the maturation of Vettel. And if he came in so young and he achieved so much, and we see this in other areas too, that at a certain point, a person's peak, you've achieved it all. Unfortunately, then the only next step is a downward slope. It's a question of how
Right.
dramatic is that going to be, and how
Correct.
are you managing that, and what is your next season? And I know that I felt for Seb watching him at Aston Martin, I felt a sadness for him in the sense that you knew he had so much more to give, but he just wasn't strategically placed where it could be shining,
Right.
and that there were also the new young kids coming in, and that is a hard thing. But I've also really respected is that that maturation has happened about him as an individual, because when you watch some of his interviews when he's a kid and, like, in his early 20s versus when he's exiting the paddock as a driver, very different personality, very different character.
Yep.
Not character as in, like, his fundamentals, but the way that his persona, and I just really liked the human being that I saw of Seb,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
he took the role of elder statesman in the paddock. Whether or not you agree with his views is irrelevant to me. It's that he saw the value of spending time with the rest of his drivers that he's competing against, because I think by the end of that, he understood that this only happens for a time, however long that may be. So that my respect for him is really high because he's achieved a lot, but also he realized I want my legacy to also be what I'm instilling in the next generation of racers.
Yeah.
So I look forward to seeing, what he may do in other motorsport disciplines or to the motorsport industry in general, because I think he still has a lot to give because of the experiences that he's had.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's really well said, and, I think it shows his, oh, I don't know, respect. Let's use the word respect in the paddock when, he drove his last race, all the drivers got together and went out to dinner, and Lewis Hamilton paid the bill, and I forget what the bill was, but it was some crazy amount of money, and, but everybody said, "Oh, yeah, Lewis can afford it." So, but what was great is that everybody could have jumped on their private jet and gone home, but no, they hung around and went to dinner and honored Seb, so I thought that was cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and even like when you watch some of the interviews when Seb and Lewis were younger, you can see the two of them ribbing each other. And there's one really great interview that I watched, and I thought, oh my goodness, the rivalry between these two. But then you flash forward to the 2020s, and you can see there's a level of respect that comes from men aging and sportsmen aging
Yeah.
that you don't see, and I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning, is that the longevity of these careers, for whatever reason, was not there as it was and in the past, but now these guys have grown up together, competed together, and it's transcending the competition. It's seeing them each other as we're in a unique, very privileged position to get to do what we do. And I respect that. You are a good competitor. And we may have differences and, may take a little bit of a liberty on the track, all those kinds of things that's going to happen in racing.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's just fascinating to me. Okay, but I don't want to lead us down too many rabbit holes. I want to keep us on track.
That's right.
Um, Next one, who I know you're so excited to talk about,
Yeah.
Mr. Fernando Alonso.
Yeah,
Tell us about
Fred.
him.
Yeah, so, again, another one of the legends of the sport for sure. Um, it's, very famous story. Again, another guy from humble circumstances, but his dad was, um, very much interested in motorsports, and I believe had done some karting himself. But regardless, his dad had built a pedal-powered go-kart for Fernando's older sister, who at the time was about 7, I believe, and she rode it one time, really didn't much care for it, but 3-year-old Fernando jumped in and loved it, and so he drove in his first proper kart race 4 years later when he was 7, and he won that race, and he just continued to win on a regular basis, and by the time he was in his early teens, he had won multiple karting championships, including a world karting championship, and so, clearly the talent was there, but while Fernando's family, they were comfortable, again, they weren't wealthy enough to fund his career up the ladder. And so Alonso knew that the only way he was going to keep racing is if he kept winning. And if you keep winning, then you can find sponsors. And so that's basically what he did. I mean, he just kept winning. And so in 1999, he won a Spanish-based single-seater championship, and part of the prize was a test in a Minardi Formula One car, as well as a season in F3000. And remember, Minardi, at the time, um, was basically the forerunner to Toro Rosso, which is now, of course, Racing Bulls. And so, um, he made his debut in Formula One in 2001 with Minardi. There were no team. Again, we're talking Flavio Briatore. They saw enough potential in him that they signed him to be a test driver in 2002. And you have to understand, back in those days, test driver meant not that you were in a simulator testing things at midnight on a Saturday night for a race setup. No, what that meant is that you were jumping in the current F1 car and you're going out to Silverstone or somewhere like that, and you're pounding out lap after lap after lap, trying new stuff, kind of as a backup for the driver since the race team itself was so busy. So he was working with the engineers and all that, trying all sorts of new stuff, real time on the racetrack, running out all sorts of thousands of miles of testing. So he was moved out of the test driver role in 2002 and into a race seat for 2003. And there he qualified on the pole of the second race of the year in Malaysia. And later that season, he won his first race at the Hungarian Grand Prix. So at the time, he was both the youngest pole winner and the youngest race winner in F1 history. Um, 2004, he was just kind of working on his craft. The car wasn't that great, but he was working on his racecraft and all that. And then it all came right. And in both 2005 and 2006, Fernando won the world championship. He won 7 races in 2005, and he won another 7 in 2006. In 2006, it was kind of interesting because at first Ferrari was really struggling, and Alonso was just dominating. But as the season wore on, Ferrari developed their car, and and as they developed it, Renault lost the technical advantage. And towards the end of the season, Schumacher really started gaining on Alonso. So Schumacher was winning. Alonso was, consistently finishing second, third, fourth, and scoring useful points. And so he hung on to win the world championship. And of course, the other ringer that year is that Kimi Räikkönen probably had the fastest car in the McLaren, but the problem with that McLaren is it was fragile. And so while Kimi won races, he either kind of won or blew it up. So it was an interesting season for sure. But in this case, it was one of those situations where towards the end of the year, Fernando had to deal with the pressure of knowing he didn't have the best car. And so he had to deliver the best results that he could. Um, in 2006, again, we just finished talking about 2006, but again, this is one of those deals where he bagged a lot of race wins early on in the season, kind of like what we saw with Max this year, well, in 2024, building up a big enough lead that it was pretty hard to go and beat him then. Um, since then, however, race victories have kind of come and gone due to, for some reason, Alonso just seems to go to what should be a good team, but at just the wrong time. For 2007, he went to McLaren. McLaren definitely viewed Lewis Hamilton, his rookie teammate, as kind of their favored son, and there became this kind of intra-team rivalry that took both of them out of the world championship and kind of handed it to Kimi Räikkönen at Ferrari. Um, and so Alonso was seriously discouraged after the 2007 season, broke his contract with McLaren, went back to Renault, won a few races for them in 2008, 2009, and then moved to Ferrari in 2010. And where he had good success, came very close to winning a third and fourth world championship, but missed it either because of bad strategy or a car that wasn't just quite there. And so he made a jump then in the mid 20 teens over to McLaren because McLaren had started a new partnership with Honda, and he was sort of like, okay, got McLaren. We know they know how to build a car. We know that Honda knows how to build an engine. And the old McLaren Honda partnership from back in the days of Senna and Prost was amazing. Here's my chance to win a world championship. Well, it just didn't work out. The Honda engine just didn't get it done at that time. And in just exhaustion from the whole Honda project, Honda moved over to Red Bull and Toro Rosso in the late 20 teens. And those McLarens were powered by Renault engines. And, but unfortunately, that didn't work out. And so Fernando actually took a 2-year hiatus from the sport. He actually did not believe that he would come back to Formula One, but he wanted to try other disciplines in the sport. And so he raced sports cars and won the 24 Hours of Le Mans twice with Toyota. He won the Rolex 24 at Daytona. He led his first Indianapolis 500. I want to say he led like 34 laps before the Honda engine blew up in his car. So he was a DNF, and so he went and tried a lot of other disciplines and kind of took a break from Formula One, and then came back in 2021 with Alpine for 2 seasons, kind of primed and ready to go, and with a whole different perspective about the sport. He'd learned new things at Indianapolis and at Le Mans, and even at Dakar about how to save your equipment and all that. And so while the Alpine project went okay, um, and he did score useful points, for whatever reason, he decided that Alpine was in trouble managerially, and he was right, they were. And so he made a very shock switch at the very last minute over to Aston Martin for the 2023 and 2024 seasons. And in 2023, he showed what he could do with a car that was sort of competitive, and he netted 8 podiums. And everybody figured, well, Fernando's back. But unfortunately, the car flattered to deceive. And in 2024, as we all know, it was a struggle. So big hopes for Aston Martin going forward that 2025 will be a better season than 24. And of course, then with Adrian Newey coming on board, and Honda, there's huge hopes for 2026. And so we know that we've got Fernando around for at least another 2 years. But again, like Schumacher, um, like Vettel, um, you have drivers who drove in 3 different decades. And so, Fernando's known for his ability to just adjust very quickly to changing conditions, whether it's the track, the car, whatever it may be, conserving his equipment, um, his ability to change tactics very quickly, to read what's going on and to change tactics to give him an advantage during the middle of a race. And then he's just known as being just super relentless in terms of his aggression and motivation. And so he's one of the all-time greats who should have won more than 2 World Driving Championships, and as one of his fans, I'm sure hoping that he at least wins a third. So that's Fernando.
Well, I don't really have anything to add other than to say I feel like when I think of Fernando, it's like fine wine.
Mhm.
He ages so beautifully, and that when you look at the holistic picture, whether or not another world championship comes, I
Right.
feel like he makes the case of an all-around fantastic driver ideal,
Yep.
especially being able to go into these different disciplines and to succeed, not just simply perform, but to actually succeed at the level that he does, tells me that there's that innate talent and then that drive. And that's what, if you have somebody who can do that, it's really about giving him the best car, the best team, and putting him at his prime. And
Yep.
so whether or not he's at his prime, I don't know that answer. Only he and his team knows that.
That's
But
right.
I think that I would not say that that's because of all of our conversations where you have primed me to become an Alonso fan. It's just, I
Mm.
really do think that I'm more objective because I'm coming to it from my not fangirl perspective of him, but respecting so much of the insights that you have shared over the years
Sure.
to make me see that. So I think that people who are coming new to the sport should really take time to read his story, his bio, to
Mhm.
understand him much better, because you would be mistaken by, if you came just like with Seb, you would be mistaken in understanding Alonso's impact onto the sport and his skill if you just looked at his time at Alpine or at Aston Martin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
Okay. Okay. So then on to our next one, Lewis Hamilton.
Right. So statistically, the greatest F1 driver of all time, right? I mean, um, and the guy's not done rewriting the record books. I mean, he's out, breaking his own records. Every time he wins a race, he just broke his own record. Um, so as the 30th F1 World Championship, he was the youngest ever. He took his first title in an amazing race in 2008, where he had to finish fifth or better um, to become world championship at the Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos, and his chief rival was Brazil's Felipe Massa. And Massa did what he needed to do. He won the race, and for about I think it was about 35 seconds, he was world champion for 2008. And within the last 200 or 300 yards of the race, um, remember Lewis had to finish fifth, I think it was. He was sixth, and he made a pass on the, basically the run down the main straight to the finish line, made the pass for fifth place, and um, broke Massa's heart by winning that world championship. So it was a pretty amazing thing, but his whole career has been amazing and somewhat improbable. Um, I mean, he came again from very humble beginnings. Um, at one time, his father Anthony was working 3 jobs to be able to pay for his son's racing. And great story. In 1995, Lewis was 10 years old, and he had won a couple of karting championships. And so he went to a motorsports awards banquet. The family didn't have enough money to buy him a suit and dress shoes, so they borrowed them from somebody. And he shows up for this awards ceremony, and his dad made him an autograph book just in case there were some people of notoriety that Lewis would want to get an autograph from. Well, none other than Ron Dennis was there, who at the time was the team principal of McLaren. And so Lewis walked up to him and said, "Hello, Mr. Dennis. I'm Lewis Hamilton, and one day I'd like to race for your team." And he asked Ron Dennis for his autograph and his phone number, which for a 10-year-old kid, that's very impressive. And Ron Dennis put it in his autograph book and said, "Call me in 9 years." Well, great answer from Dennis, grow up and we'll talk, one of those things. Well, Lewis kept winning, and because of that conversation, Ron Dennis actually did start watching Lewis Hamilton, if only by scanning the information about what was going on in the karting scene. And 3 years later, he called the Hamilton residents, Dennis did, and committed to help Lewis financially with the proviso that Hamilton do 2 things. One, that he continued to diligently pursue his schoolwork, and that he would, continue to put in the best effort he could with his racing. And so, Hamilton eventually won 8 karting championships in 6 years, and then he moved into single-seaters and very much did the rapid progression, winning 3 championships, including the GP2 title, which then moved him into F1 for 2007. And in his first season as a rookie, he had 4 wins and scored 12 podiums, and he only missed out on the world championship by 1 point to Kimi Räikkönen. But again, like we had in our conversation with about Alonso, um, they were Hamilton and Alonso were so busy trying to beat each other that they really impaired the progress and the battle against the rest of the field. And so Raikkonen was able to take advantage of that and win the championship. Um, but then in 2008, in his second year, he had 5 victories and another 6 races. He was on the podium for a total of 11 podiums. And like I said, he won the world championship on the last race of the last lap of the last race in Brazil. And so Hamilton then became the youngest world champion ever. So he raced with McLaren Mercedes for several more years, and then very famously and shockingly left the McLaren family and moved to Mercedes, where we all know that he stayed with the team until the end of 2024, winning another 6 world championships. And statistically, he's the greatest Formula One driver of all time, over 100 wins, over 100 pole positions and counting. Um, and, he was knighted by, at the time, Prince Charles. And really, Lewis is known not only for being a fierce but very fair competitor. He's still one of the fastest F1 drivers over a single lap. Um, And I think that, um, in my mind, I think of Lewis Hamilton kind of like I would think of Jackie Stewart, um, in that, um, both of those guys did a lot for the sport, but they also did a lot for the world outside of sport. And so, um, I think, and and so when I compare Hamilton to Stewart, that's met with the utmost respect and admiration, um, because Stewart accomplished a lot in a very short career, and as we've discussed. And so, um, how much longer will Lewis drive? I don't know. I mean, he's more towards the end of his career than he is, even the middle of his career. But going to Ferrari is going to be a new challenge. He's got to deal with Charles Leclerc, who's certainly very, very quick. And it'll be interesting to see what he does to transform Ferrari and maybe bring a world championship back to Maranello, something that both great drivers like Alonso and Vettel were not able to do. But maybe now they've got the right management in place that they're able to go and do that. So that's my take on Lewis Hamilton.
I think it's fantastic. I think you did a great job. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see where he moves forward. He has a very unique story and one that I think a new generation of racers look to emulate. And I think he takes his role as a role model very seriously. And you can see that he does want to have an impact outside of the sport. And so, I mean, someone who has achieved as great as he has, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Sure.
so our last but not least is Mr. Max Verstappen.
Yeah. And so, you know, all the other drivers that we've talked about all raced in three different decades. Max at this stage has only raced in 2 decades. Um, Most of us know, of course, that Max's father is Jos Verstappen, who himself raced in Formula One. Who I think Jos had like well over 100 starts and a few podiums, and so he was certainly um, instrumental in helping Max um, take the right career path. And interestingly enough, Max's mother was a karting champion in Belgium in her own right. So, to say that Max has racing in his genetics, it's pretty hard to argue with that comment for sure. Um, I know that, Max has the benefit of coming from a family that is certainly more well-to-do than any of the other drivers that we have spoken about tonight. Not that they were mega wealthy, but they were certainly much more wealthy than the families of Schumacher, Alonso, Hamilton, or Vettel. Um, but that said, he also had a massive advantage in that he had a father who had also um, climbed the ladder and had made it to Formula One. And so he knew the steps to be made, whereas a racing dad typically doesn't have that depth of knowledge that Max's dad would have had. So there was a little bit of an advantage there, I think. But again, that doesn't take away from the immense natural ability that Max has. And so Max started driving karts by the time he was 4 years old. And by the time he was 8, he was racing them and won multiple karting championships, jumped into single seaters. And after a very brief time in the world of junior single seaters, Red Bull plucked him out of the junior formula, and Max made his F1 debut with Toro Rosso, the Red Bull junior team, in 2015 at the age of 18. So, I mean, if you think about it today, you'll be, you know, 28 sometime this year. So, I mean, he's been in the sport for this will be his 11th season. Um, and I think it's pretty remarkable that he's got that kind of Grand Prix mileage under his belt at such a young age. Um, the following year, he was promoted to Red Bull Racing. early in the year. A few races had run where he was with Toro Rosso. Then Red Bull made a switch, pulled out Danny Kvyat, put Danny back at Toro Rosso, moved Max up to Red Bull Racing, and lo and behold, Max won his debut race with the team in Spain and wound up finishing fifth overall in the standings. So just a remarkable debut into Formula One. Um, Max in his early days was incredibly aggressive, really didn't want many friends on track. And his driving prompted Charlie Whiting, who was at that time the steward for F1. He actually sat Max down and basically, um, you know, mentored him and coached him in an effort to tone down that aggressiveness. Um, so during the time between then and 2020, certainly Max won races. There was development pains with Red Bull because they, for a while, were on the Renault engine, which was not as competitive as they would have liked. But eventually, they moved to the Honda engine, which is a very good engine. And in 2021, Max had the car and the engine that was needed to compete against Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. And what we got to see as fans in 2021 was this massive season-long battle between Max and Lewis, where they traded wins throughout the season, and they had a few comings together where they wound up crashing into each other. One was very famously at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, where they came together, very high-speed crash, each blaming one another, but basically it was a racing incident that was a case of two drivers at their very peak performance who were unwilling to give an inch to the other one, and they wound up crashing into each other out of the race. And then there was a crash at Monza in the first chicane that left Max's Red Bull parked on top of the roll bar of Lewis's Mercedes. I mean, I've always said if Lewis had didn't, if there was no such thing as a halo, and Lewis's car didn't have that halo, Lewis probably would have been killed in that, even though it was a very slow speed accident. The way that car, the way the Red Bull hit the Mercedes and wound up landing, pretty sure that, um, Lewis could have lost his head on that one, literally. And then, of course, at the very last race of the season, there was a very controversial finish having to do with one of the Williams crashing very late in the race and the deployment of the safety car and all that. We won't get into it, but basically what happened is that Max wound up being the world championship, leaving that race, and Lewis was left a very shell-shocked number two in the championship. But it was quite the event. And with the change of regulations in 2022 to the ground effect car, Red Bull got their car right, and Mercedes did not. And so the hope of seeing the Verstappen and Hamilton championship battle continue from 2021 into 22, it never materialized. And in fact, Max went on a tear in 22 and 23 and really in 24, winning world championships each of those years, especially in 23, which just Red Bull just dominated everything. They won every race except for the Singapore Grand Prix, which was won by Ferrari. So, Max, in the meantime, has run up a very tidy number of championships. And again, he's a four-time world champion now going in to the season. But I don't know that he's necessarily the odds-on favorite to win the championship. Certainly, he's one of the favorites, but I don't think he is an overwhelming favorite because I don't know that Red Bull now has the best car. Anyway, Max has certainly risen to the very top of Formula One in a very short time. And with those championships, um, and age um, and being, having fatherhood impending for him, he's become less edgy. He's become a bit more affable from a personality standpoint. Um, and so he's becoming a guy that's building a very large following worldwide, but especially with the Dutch fans. There's usually an incredibly large contingent of fans from Holland who are there in orange cheering on their hero. And so, um, really cool to see. Um, and the Dutch don't have an F1 team, but they have a driver, much like you would see with Ferrari um, and the Tifosi. Certainly, Max's fans are every bit as boisterous and colorful as the Ferrari Tifosi are. So that's Max. Very interesting. I can't wait to see what he does in 2025 and who's going to challenge him.
I think he did a great job there. I find Max a very interesting character, an individual, and um I think we're still hearing and seeing more that maturation process that I would reference when it came to Seb. I think it's still in progress when it comes
Right.
to Max. So it'll be interesting to see how his career continues moving forward and with the regulation changes and the development wars that are going to happen even before the regs change. And I do agree with you. He's one of the favorites
Right.
to win. It'll
Right.
be very interesting to see as the season progresses with everything that we know about Max's personality beforehand, what that will look like, how that will play out in this next year. And
Exactly.
and I think it's wise to note also the fact that he's a stepfather, but he's going to have a biological child as well, and how
Mhm.
that will change any person. Because isn't there a racer? Was it Senna who said it? I knew it was about being aggressive on another racer because he had kids and he would be thinking about that. Was it Senna who said that? Do you know which quote I'm
Probably.
talking about?
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it sounds like something Senna would have said. I don't know exactly the quote, but he certainly would have been that calculating.
Yeah, and it seems very interesting to me because especially when I think about Alonso and some of the interviews that he's given, you wonder the decision to defer those kinds of things and really pursue this relentlessness towards his craft, and then you compare him against, him being Alonso or Max against the others we've talked about, especially like Seb and Schumacher, who did make that choice to
Right.
also have a personal life and develop that, and then you also compare that against Lewis who has chosen to defer that as well. It's just fascinating to me about how that changes the racing brain and the calculations of how you're going to be assertive and aggressive and engage on the track and or even how much you're going to put time to developing your racecraft and maintaining all the other holistic elements of being a quality champion racer.
Right.
So I think it'll be fascinating to watch how these next seasons unfold. So with
Agreed.
with Max, yes, you had other people you could have brought in, right? And they
Yeah.
could have talked about there was a calculation of time and focus. But I think at this point we have closed out our F1 legends. I have to say thank you, Dick, because this was a lot of work on your part. I mean, I know you enjoy this stuff, but still, you
Right.
researched it and you delivered all of this to us. I thank you for the education that you've given and for your point of view. I don't think you would ever say that you're like the arbiter of all this. Our audience is welcome to give us their opinions and if they think there was somebody you should have included or any of that, right? But this is your research and what you felt was fair as to create a primer for anybody who's new to the sport to really understand where racers have brought the sport forward. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think it is. And in one parting shot from me, if you think about Schumacher, Alonso, Hamilton, and Vettel, that's 20 world championships from
Mm,
four drivers, and all of them came from very humble beginnings,
mhm.
which makes me wonder about hunger. And you think about their longevity and that hunger and remembering those humble beginnings. What did that do for their hunger to keep racing? So That's my
Yeah.
parting shot because I don't have the answer to that. It sure makes you wonder.
Yeah. It's very true. Very, very true. Okay, that might be a conversation we'll have in a different time.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, well, I look forward to our future conversation.
Likewise.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.